Understanding how to secure funding is crucial for turning innovative ideas into successful businesses. Engineering students must build their understanding of the need to predict and then manage costs during the early stages of a startup before sales and profits are sufficient to cover capital spending and operating costs. Here, we'll discuss how you can introduce your students to sources of funding for new enterprises and some key cost and time considerations that influence the amount of investment a startup will need. A startup needs funding to cover its costs during innovation and design stages until its sales generate enough income for it to be profitable. These costs include one-off capital spending on equipment for research, development, or manufacturing, and overheads, including recruiting and employing staff, finding and occupying premises, utilities, and monthly operating costs. A funding calculation needs to be both complete, including all potential costs and overheads, and sufficient, using a realistic amount for each. Just as an engineer will complete a risk assessment, you'll need to identify potential sources of risk and uncertainty in your costs and timescale, and include sufficient contingency in your calculations, an amount to cover possible overspends, setbacks, or slower progress. To help your students understand funding requirements, you can do some of the following exercises with them. You can use the example in the learner resource to illustrate how a funding calculation is put together. Then ask students, how much funding will the startup need if it is to launch its product in the predicted 12 months? How much funding will it need to become stable? How might using a higher or lower contingency affect the funding required and risk of failure? You can task your students with creating and operating your college course as a business. Students can organize their ideas into capital spending and overheads. Students can discuss common costs and where costs might differ between startups in different industries. A startup's time to profitability will depend on the time needed to develop the right product or service for a market, an effective promotional strategy, and other factors that affect price and sales volume. An enterprise's cash runway is how long an enterprise can operate until the funding runs out. Entrepreneurs must control their costs so their initial funding lasts until they are profitable. The runway metaphor can help students gain a deeper understanding. Aircraft need to accelerate to generate enough lift to stay in the air, and an enterprise equivalent to takeoff is to become self-sustaining. Costs shorten the runway, and income lengthens the runway. An enterprise needs to take off before it reaches the end of the runway. Introduce the students to the Funding for Startups and Scale-Ups online interactive tool. This tool is a great way to help them investigate and respond to the investment needs of two different startup companies. You can input costs of development, manufacturing, promotion, contingency, and then set revenues and sales volumes, which will then help identify likely funding requirements, time to launch, and time to profitability. You can change the predictions for unit price and sales volumes, and explore how this changes the bank balance and when an enterprise might reach profitability. And you can change the contingencies and look at how these affect final predictions. This tool can be used with the learner resource and the examples included in them. Entrepreneurs have a range of options to meet their funding requirements. These include loans, a borrowed sum of money paid back with interest, angel investors, high net worth individuals who invest in startups for equity, and venture capital, Investor funds that provide funding to startups and scale-ups for equity. Each of these sources has advantages and disadvantages. You can explore these in more detail in the learner resource. Entrepreneurs may also choose or need to find alternative funding, especially at the earliest stages. This might include self-funding, bootstrapping, starting small with little money, or crowdfunding, raising money online from many people, while grants and tax relief may be available for research and development. Intrapreneurs, someone who wants to start a new enterprise in an existing company, must find internal funding and seek project sponsors, such as senior colleagues who can make this money available. Sponsors need to be persuaded of the opportunity, just like external funders. Ask learners to suggest where startups obtain their funding. Share ideas before discussing the 3 primary sources. When discussing self-funding, learners may identify the advantages that entrepreneurs from more advantaged backgrounds may enjoy. Emphasize that this highlights the importance of developing your personal network and the help and support local or regional enterprise hubs can provide, leveling the playing field for a more merit-based approach. You may want to suggest that they research the backgrounds of top entrepreneurs. Discuss whether intrapreneurs face the same challenges as entrepreneurs. To bring these concepts to life for your students, let's consider a case study. This is also available in the learner resource documents. Ask them to imagine they work in the R&D department of a large electronic engineering company. They've developed a new material with many potential commercial applications. They're meeting with senior colleagues who could become project sponsors for funding continued research and development. Colleagues prefer a large staff and research budget, while potential sponsors suggest minimal staffing and budget. Together, encourage them to explore a third option. Start small, and as agreed milestones are reached and products developed, funding can be expanded. Once you've explored this scenario with your students, you can ask them to do the following. Develop an argument for a large initial budget and an argument against it. Do the same for a small, cautious budget, arguments for and against. How does the third option combine the best of both worlds? Understanding funding is essential for turning engineering innovations into successful businesses. By delving into the intricacies of funding requirements, sources of capital, and risk and investment management, your students will be empowered to not only navigate, but to shape and be prepared for their own innovative startups and scale-ups. Thanks for watching, and feel free to revisit the films to recap any ideas and tools that will help you while teaching.